Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Susan, and on behalf of Perimeter 81, thank you for joining us today for this exciting webinar, How to Stay Ahead of Digital Identity and Security Trends. We have an exciting time ahead of us, and if you look at our agenda, we have a speaker introduction where I'm going to introduce you guys to today's speakers. We're going to go through the state of digital identity and security trends today, as well PKI, machine identity management, zero trust and trends for modern business, and an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop a line inside the question box in Bright Talk, and we'd be happy to answer it at the end of the presentation. So let's go into the speakers that we have today. First, I'd like to introduce you all to Daniel Goldfeld, VP of Customer Success at Perimeter 81. As well, we have Ryan Yackel, VP of Product Marketing at Keyfactor. So guys, why don't you tell us a little bit about the state of digital identity and security trends today? And Ryan, why don't we start it off with you? Can you tell the audience about yourself, your thoughts on the current state of digital identity and security trends from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. This is a great webinar to be a part of. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so I'm Ryan Yackel. I'm part of a company called Keyfactor. We specialize in public key infrastructure and cryptography. And everything in between as it relates to what we're talking about today, which is machine identities. So a little look into kind of what I'll be presenting next is there's been a lot of focus on human identities. I think everyone probably logged in using their password. Hopefully, Michael, you didn't log in with password 123, right, to make sure that everything was secure. No. But a lot of times, we have we focus a lot on these human identities, which are usernames and passwords. But we got to think broader about that. And I'll be discussing how machine identities are actually kind of taking over the world here.
Wonderful. And Daniel, same question to you. Tell us about yourself and the state of digital identity and security trends from your eyes.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me. It's great to be part of this forum. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Michael. I'm Daniel. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Perimeter 81. We're a company that focuses in zero trust network access, secure remote access, and basically providing companies with the ability to have a completely managed solution that will allow them to secure their on-premise and cloud resources and basically provide access from anywhere in the world for their employees. Today, we're going to discuss some of the challenges and trends that we've identified through a couple of researches that we've made, and the challenges that a lot of professionals in the domain have identified for 2021, 2022, the post-COVID era, and basically the different trends that we identify in general within the different domains, especially with security and IT.
Wonderful. So let's get into it. Now it's time to discuss PKI and machine identity management. So Ryan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. Obviously, this is in our space, but as we go through it, it's going to be a pretty interesting discussion. I hope that you have questions around it. Machine identity has been getting a lot of buzz lately, so please go ahead and enter any questions you have. I'll try to answer them along the way. If I see something pop up, I'll try to answer that right away. Or at the end, we'll go ahead and take questions at the end here. So hopefully I didn't scare everybody too much with the skeleton that you're seeing on the screen here. But sometimes when we talk about machine identity management, the word machine identity usually invokes something around Terminator or something around something nefarious. Yeah, I just rewatched The Matrix recently. Great movie. Matrix 5 is coming out. No, 4, I think, is coming out next year. So they can have this not a good reputation if you talk about, these machine identities are taking over the world. But it's really not that way. Machine identities, if you think about kind of how we can understand them, you first have to understand the broader IAM scope in the market. So IAM, identity and access management. What you see is that a lot of times, and a lot of vendors that are out there, they focus traditionally on these human identities. I mentioned earlier about the joke about having your password be something that anyone can guess, right? But there is something that's going on, right? Human identities are used to log in everywhere you go. People are using things like SSO and multi-factor and privilege access, right? All these things help with the sophistication around securing these human identities. But if you look at your workforce today, you may look at your workforce as actually dwindling, or if they are investing in your workforce, I guarantee you there's way more machines and their identities out there than you do have workforce, right? Think about right now today, what are the physical devices that you have in your hand? You have a smartwatch, you have a laptop, a desktop, you have a monitor, you have a webcam that I'm interacting with now, you have your Nest home security system, right? We think about a lot of these machine identities as physical devices, and all those things need to be secure. However, it goes beyond just those physical identities as well. So if you think about what's going on in the DevOps arena, right? You're spinning up containers, tearing down environments very quickly, using virtual environments to build applications, to deploy code. And you're also investing in things like RPA and microservices and all this stuff, right? All these things actually have identities, and they need to communicate between one another. And if I give an example of this so we can kind of understand this, anyone can actually do this right now. If you wanted to, open up your Chrome browser, go to your favorite website, and you'll kind of understand what a machine identity is. This is an example of a SSL TLS certificate. So if I were to go to my website or go to iStock Photo in this example, and I were to click on the little lock there and view the certificate, it'll show me that this is being secured by a digital certificate. This is an example of cryptography being used in an identity, which is right now your web server, your website, whatever it is, right? But if you look at it going further, there's more than just certificates that are out there. There's things like SSH keys and certificates. These are things that garner like back-end systems, like Citrix machines, things like that. There's cryptographic keys and symmetric keys used to protect data at rest in the cloud or even on premise. There's things like code sign certificates and secrets managers are used heavily in DevOps processes, either to verify and sign code or to quickly put certs and secrets on applications that you're spinning up and tearing down very quickly. So there's this rapid growth of all these different areas in cryptography that are being used, and all these different identities are being used. And they're being used with different types of cryptography. It's not just not all people just use certificates. They use all these different types of items here to secure that machine-to-machine communication, similar to the way that human identities are actually accomplished. And I mentioned earlier that there is this rapid growth of machine identities that are out there. I want to highlight this, getting to my point here about this trend in machine identity management and how it's actually picking up a lot of speed lately. So you may be hearing about it in your own, water coolers, or I don't know if we have water coolers anymore. Everybody's remote now, but drinking your water bottle virtually, whatever it is, right? You're going to be having these conversations around securing machine identities. It's because it's actually being recognized more and more in the analyst space. So back in 2020, there was a hype cycle for IAM strategy that came out from Gartner, and that was the first time machine identity management was actually introduced. You fast forward a year later, and machine identity management is in the hype cycle again, and it's listed as a high priority. But what they're also showing is that it's a top trend in security and risk trends for 2021. And so just like I've been saying earlier, right, they're recognizing the same thing. You have all these devices that are increasing, and it continues to grow. You have to have some type of enterprise-wide strategy to manage these identities, the certificates, the keys, all that cryptographic assets that I was mentioning earlier, to better actually get into a state of digital transformation. So those are some of the big things of what's actually moving the needle forward around this focus around machine identity management. And one thing I'll also mention is it's actually not hard to make the connection to why teams are so focused on this. If you think about it, and I know everyone likes to use the word digital transformation and zero trust, we're going to be talking about that as well later today. And you got to talk about what they actually mean, right? But when we talk about digital transformation, a lot of times we're talking about digital things. That sounds like, thank you, Ryan. That's very obvious. Yes, digital things, right? But digital things require digital trust. And this is the mantra, the viewpoint that we have over at Keyfactor as well, is that if you're deploying more and more of these digital assets, they have identities, they have to connect with one another. You have to have digital trust between those. If you don't have that digital trust, you're vulnerable to something terrible happening in your organization. So how do you solve that? Well, you solve that with securing those machine identities, with cryptography, with things like PKI, secrets management, and so on. So those are the reasons why we're getting all this influx into the buzz around machine identity management. And to further on that, I want to talk about a report that we did with the Ponymon Institute this past year as we were getting more and more buzz around machine identity management. We said, you know what, we need to have a state of report because nobody has it right now. We want to make sure we can get this out to people that are actually trying to understand the space. And so these are some of just the highlights of that report. They're not fully comprehensible. I just want to kind of highlight a few things that were in this report. And Daniel's going to be talking about zero trust. That's one of the big things in cloud that's driving the use of more cryptographic assets that are in your business today. So when we surveyed them, here's what they said. 61% of the companies that we actually talked to said they're deploying more cryptographic keys and digital certificates than ever before in their environments today. And I mentioned earlier, the top two are really cloud and also these zero trust security strategy that's going on in their organization. The cloud one is a no-brainer, right? If you're adopting cloud services, you can do things faster. You can do things more flexible. You're more agile to do things. You can spin up things way quicker than you couldn't before with on-premise materials. And you can easily connect to things faster than you could ever before. So you have this deployment of management, all these applications in the cloud, but then you have all these identities that are connecting and talking to one another. It's getting pretty crazy. And especially with the introduction of teams using more and more and more DevOps processes, they're going to be using cloud as a main instrument to achieve those DevOps principles. So again, we know that that's already coming, right? We know that cloud's a big thing. The other one is zero trust. And I know we're going to be talking about that later on with Perimeter 81. But what's interesting is that zero trust, again, has a lot of times in the IAM space only been focused on those human identities, user roles, user permissions. It's really around those human identities. Now we're seeing more and more, we're adopting that human identity strategy and going, we need to apply a lot of this to these machine identities. Because again, they're outnumbering us like crazy. We can't just ignore this other area of the business. And then some of the challenges we identified in our surveys was coming out to them was, and you can kind of boil them down into a few things. One is around the operational burden. So 62% said all this growth of keys and certificates are actually hampering our team and our ability to perform our jobs. And the more burden you add, more workload that you add without any ability to mitigate that, that's going to be a problem. The other one is 55% said that they had a concern around the mismanagement or configuration of their keys. So not having the right policy and control behind these keys and certificates. And then the other one that's very scary is that nobody even knows how many certificates they have in their organization, which includes self-signed certificates. Around 53% said that they have no clue how many they have. So if you think about it, it's really boiling down to a human problem, not being able to have that significant skills to do cryptography right. Cryptography is very hard. It's very complex. It's technology. Public key infrastructure has been around for a very long time. But cryptographic stuff that you would, if you ever watched a Dan Brown movie out there and were confused about how they actually solve the puzzles, all that is cryptography based. It's all asymmetric and symmetric based stuff going on there. So think about that in a real world setting. It's very, very, very complex. So the burden is there. Then you don't have if you don't have the proper people in place, you're going to have misconfigurations, and then that leads you just to abandoning the control around the majority of your keys and certificates that are out there. So all this kind of plays in, and these are challenges that lead to some bad things. And one of the main things that comes out of this isn't the only thing, but it's certificate related outages that happen. So certificates they have lifespans on them. If you look at what Apple and Google and Firefox and all these major companies out there, what they've done recently is they've shortened the lifespan of a certificate more and more and more. Now it's under a year for the lifespan of a digital certificate. And a lot of these are talking about are the public certificates, right? So we had talked about in my earlier demonstration, I said, hey, go open your web browser and go click on that icon. That's a public certificate. Well, you also have all these internal certificates that are actually behind your own network, and they're not exposed publicly. Those all have internal certificates to keep your company secure. So if you think about, well, there may be thousands and maybe millions of certificates that are out there publicly, there's billions of certificates that are internally to your organization. And around 3.1 outages are happening to the companies that we were talking to today. Around 88% said that they had at least one unplanned certificate outage in the last 24 months. And to understand and see how this kind of plays out, I want to show you quickly just how this kind of pans out in a real world example. And by the way, this is not to call out these companies here. This happens all the time. And the only time you would know about these certificates expiring or having an impact on your company is only if it was a public certificate. So for example, this past year, Spotify had a wildcard certificate outage and their system was down for a while. Well, how did you know that? Well, you were trying to listen to Spotify and you couldn't get on, right? Microsoft Teams had this same thing too. You were trying to connect over the internet and what happened? One of their certs went down. Well, you couldn't get on Teams. You knew right away, you know what was going on, right? Epic Games is the one we'll talk about today. They had an outage that infected their Fortnite game, which is one of the biggest games in the world. And so what happened was back in around 12 o'clock in the afternoon, they had an outage. So one of their TLS certificates expired, and it basically halted all traffic to their backend systems. They figured out where the certificate was, and then they reissued that certificate pretty quickly. And they got around 25 people directly involved in working on this, and they figured it out, right? The problem, though, is if you look at it, you go, hey, Ryan, like, okay, well, they're only down for, around 40, 46 minutes. That's actually not what happened. If you look what happened between 12:46 p.m. all the way to 5:35, their entire their launcher and Epic Games Store was entirely down until that point. Well, why'd that occur? What happened was, even though the certificate had an outage and it was relatively fixed quickly, it manually was fixed, not automated, not with an automated procedure, not orchestrated that way. Even though it was fixed within less than an hour, the damage it did to the entire system was way worse than that, and it lasted a lot longer. So basically, what happened was, when that cert went down, they had millions of these retries actually hitting the system. And what they were doing was basically getting DDoS, right? They were basically under attack by themselves, by their own customers trying to access the system. They couldn't get through, right? But they fixed it. But again, it resulted in a way worse impact financially and user experience wise to their business. But I want to say this too about Epic Games. This goes back to some of the things we were making earlier. What I love about this is they actually owned up to it, and they wrote a blog about what happened with this certificate that occurred. And if you look at some of the highlighted things here, there's some things we were talking about today in the reports that we found with machine identity management. The first thing was they were not actively monitored. They were not actively monitoring the system. So it was an oversight. They didn't know. They had no visibility into if or when that certificate was about to be expired. So they had no visibility into it. The other one is they didn't have any automatic renewals in place. So a lot of times with systems, you can set up automatic renewals to renew that, so there isn't this type of an outage. They had to manually do that. And then the other one is that they didn't really understand. They had an understanding that there was a wildcard certificate, but it was used by multiple areas of their production services. So that's a huge single point of failure. If something like that happens, it affects all these other areas. So an example, the last one kind of goes back to, if you think about visibility is the first one, not having visibility in your certs. 2 is the manual processes, and 3 is really a consultative managed expertise issue, that if somebody knew what this wildcard cert was able to do, they would have had more rigor behind this and to make sure this wouldn't happen. So this is kind of what an idea of what an outage looks like, how it affects systems downstream. And again, you have millions or billions of these across the entire internet and in your also intranet that could go down at any moment if you don't have that focus. As I kind of wrap up here, I want to give you 4 strategies for success. We talked a lot about some trends, but I want to give you some success metrics to look at and how to do well with machine identity management. So the first one is, because everybody likes practical takeaways. Somebody likes somebody to just show up and just like tell them cool stuff. Even though we like to make really cool PowerPoints and things like that. One is establish a crypto center of excellence. So a CCOE, as they say. When we surveyed, it was around 33% people said they actually are starting to develop a crypto center of excellence. And that means things like putting together a leadership team that could be cross-departmental. It could be research into the latest algorithms and standards you need to keep up with. It could be the implementation of tools to manage these things. And it could be best practices. So this is a big thing that's being pushed a lot these days. It's a good way to have a baseline of like where you're getting to and what you can actually formulate in your organization. And all that to be said is that is something you do before you get to step 2. I guess you could do these at the same time, but step 2 is to invest in tools. Everyone will say this, like buying a tool doesn't really do anything for you. Like you can buy a tool that issues a bunch of certs, but if you don't know how to use it correctly, you don't know how to renew your certificates, that's a problem. But tools will help with the management of all this stuff if you factor it into the overall Crypto Center of Excellence planning and commissioning. So think about, do we have something around certificate automation? Do we have something that's managing our secrets? All those cryptographic assets we talked about, make sure you have tools in place that are placed there pretty evenly so that you're not going to experience any of these outages or risks associated with them. And the last 2 things before I pass over back to Daniel is that there's a big noise in the space around this term crypto agility. And crypto agility is traditionally meant to a lot of things, which is around making sure you can easily rotate keys, easily update algorithms, and figure out where there's bugs in your cryptographic library so that you're ready for now and also the future. It also means extending cryptography across the area of your business, right? It's not just being able to have a cryptographic agility to change things on a fly and swap things in and out, but it's also being able readily to say, hey, to the development team, hey, you're using the secrets manager. Let's make sure that's in policy. Hey, you're using this certificate management or your certificate authority. Let's make sure we hook into that so you don't have an outage. It's being agile in your business so that everything you want to do with your cryptographic assets are done in a way that benefit the business as a whole, and it's not a security isn't the overlord over the developers or over the organizations. Is there to help people be agile in their digital transformation and securing these machine identities. The last one is looking for closing the skill gap. So if you have anything related to any problems related to not having sufficient support around managing PKI, look for a solution that's PKI as a service, which would bundle in all the PKI infrastructure plus software to help you manage these certificates and issue them at scale. Or look for a way, if you can do it yourself, look for a way that maybe you have some SaaS agreement set up with a certificate authority in the cloud that you can easily generate certificates from, but you don't have to worry about all the infrastructure that goes behind that. So those are kind of the 4 strategies I would say. We've probably got a lot more, but those are kind of the trends in machine identity management and kind of the ways you can look to start reeling that in and take back control.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Ryan. I do see we have a few questions. However, I will save them for the end. And if you do have any more, please feel free to ask it inside the Bright Talk question box. And moving on, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Ryan, really interesting. So we've touched a little bit about how you secure connection and how you manage a secure connection to different machines and resources. But we also want to talk a little bit about zero trust and trends for the modern business. And for that, we will need to dive a little bit back into history and discuss how things used to be and how they've changed in the last couple of years. So probably a little bit pre-COVID and hopefully a little bit before, if you all think about your regular workspace and your regular office and your regular site-centric network, you'll probably think about an office, you think about a data center, and all of the state-of-the-art security that is basically protecting your on-premise, right? You're coming to the office, you're working with your laptops, you're working with your machines, everything is stored in the same location and protected by one big firewall and a lot of different other vendors that you probably onboarded in order to secure a connection. It's usually centered around a single physical location, maybe a couple of locations. You have your headquarters, you have a lot of different branches. You have a couple of employees that are using your VPN in order to connect to this office or to this branch. It's usually very, very focused on your on-premise solutions. Everything has to go through it. And it's a little bit, if we're honest, is a little bit static, non-distributed, sort of a perimeter. And this is usually how a lot of companies worked. But what happened in the last several years, even before COVID, if you think about it, what we saw is that a lot of companies started moving into the cloud. right? Either by migrating some of the services into the cloud, the ones that they basically decided they don't want to manage on-premise. Some companies were born in the cloud. Some companies decided they want to move all of their infrastructure into the cloud in order to reduce cost, in order to have a better and more scalable solution. And some organizations decided to go with sort of a hybrid approach, where they kept their crown jewel software still in the HQ, still in their data center, and then started outsourcing, or at least moving something to the cloud, working with other SaaS solutions like Salesforce, Office 365, and other solutions that are maybe not even hosted by the company. And this caused a couple of challenges for those organizations, which basically resulted in trying to build a distributed and scalable perimeter, where you have basically one access point that is connecting you to a lot of different resources, regardless of where they are, and have one central authentication service that is actually authenticating your users, regardless of where they are. So they can be in New York, they can be in Tel Aviv, they can be traveling. And of course, a granular zero trust security and authorization solution, where basically you only provide the necessary access rights to your users, right? If before that you could use a VPN, connect to your internal network, and have full access to everything through every protocol and every port, with the zero trust network approach, you started blocking those and basically managing them in a more granular way, where you were basically focusing on providing the least privilege you needed to each one of your users, managing those profiles user-based rather than resource-based, and making sure that you're not providing too many of privileges to users that don't really need them. So with this modern user-centric network security came a lot of challenges. First of all, a lot of the differences were distributed and the different resources. You had a lot of different regions in AWS. You had a lot of different regions in your cloud providers. You had your HQ, you had your branches, and you had your employees that had to connect remotely. And this is where actually the zero trust network access basically started to blossom and grow, right? The idea of the zero trust network access was focused around the fact that the corporate network moved from your office, from on-premise into the actual internet, where you need to be able to create secure perimeters for your users to be able to access and connect to the relevant resources in a secure manner without jeopardizing your organization and without increasing the attack surface of your company. This is where basically Perimeter 81 come into play, where Perimeter 81 realized that not only you need such a solution, but also because a lot of companies scale, and because those resources scale, and because more and more employees are starting to work remotely, and because more and more resources are actually basically becoming a distributed technical stack, you need to have a solution that is able to scale, that is able to grow, and basically that you can add and grow as you go. So once we've developed the product and basically started to try and understand where the domain is going, especially with the recent events of COVID and everything else, we've decided to basically run a couple of researches in order to understand what the domain leaders in IT, in security, think that their up-and-coming challenges for the next years. Because a lot have changed in the last 2 years. A lot of different plans changed. A lot of organizations changed the way they work. A lot of companies that were working from the office with all of their employees working from the same location had to shift. And it was interesting for us to see if we're on the right track. It was interesting for us to see what is going to be the major change that is coming, and what are the trends and the challenges that those stakeholders in those different organizations see. For that, we had sent and run quite an extensive research. We got 550 responses from IT and security professionals around the world, from 20 different industries, from 15 different global offices and regions. So this was basically covering quite a big geolocation and a lot of different industries in order to be able to identify those trends. And there were a couple of interesting findings that we wanted to share with you, and some of the trends that we've identified through this research. So one of the first interesting things that we saw is that 86% of companies plan to have employees working remotely or hybrid post-COVID. So if you think about it, there's a lot of different articles about this, about different big companies that have decided not to bring the employees back, even with the vaccinations, basically moving into what they call a hybrid workplace, where either employees are working completely remotely or have to come to the office 1 or 2 days a week. And where basically they keep the same formation that they've built for the different organizations during COVID, and basically start to make it the new normal, right? So even companies that were not planning to shift into sort of a remote workspace had to do this because of COVID, and then decided to stay. This is an interesting trend because this is something that we did forecast as Perimeter 81, but we thought this is going to happen within 5 years. We were thinking about it at 2019 or 2018 even. And the interesting part that this has actually happened within a year. And we see those trends happening all across the industry and different industries, regardless of geolocations. We see it across the world. And it seems that the new normal is definitely the approach of working in the hybrid workspace. And we see from the research that only 13% of the people that are actually answered our research are actually planning to return their employees to the office, which means that if you think about the legacy infrastructure that we've covered in my first slide, where you protect the on-premise, all of this became not a central piece part in their security suite, even if they had it before. So they had to basically transition and change the way they work in a very, very short period of time. Another thing that we saw and was very interesting is actually that 60% of the organizations have more of their company computing resources going to the cloud. And this is something that actually happened even before COVID, but we see that this is happening even more. This means that basically most of the organizations, regardless of their industry and domain, are actually moving to the cloud. They understand that keeping their resources on-premise, basically managing and spending time on on-premise resources and their maintenance is not the way to go. And they're starting to shift, or even in the midst, or even finishing migrating into the cloud, which means that basically most of their computing force, most of their resources are going to be in the cloud. 30% of those who answered this have more than half of their resources on the cloud, which is very, very interesting. And another 9% only have more resources that are currently on-premise. This means that the trend is pretty clear. All of them are actually moving to the cloud. They need to secure it. They need to have the ability to provide remote access to those machines. They need to be able to secure the connection of the machines, and also the remote access. All of the employees that should work on those different resources in order to develop a product, in order to gain access into different resources, in order to be able to do their day-to-day work. Another thing that our research showed are the things that are most concerning for those IT and security specialists. And this is very, very interesting because you can see that there are two very main key factors that are considered to be the main risk for those organizations. If you look at the top ranked security concerns in 2021, it was left by data theft, following by ransomware. Both of those attack surfaces are related to gaining access into company resources, either by gaining access and stealing information that is then can be used against the company, or by locking the existing resources on the different environments that the company is running and the different resources, and basically asking for ransom in order to be able to decrypt this information. Both of those risks are high risk. They're happening quite a lot. Probably all of you are following the recent trends in the cybersecurity world, and you know that this is something that is happening to big organizations as well as small. And this can pose a very, very high risk, and we can see it in the reports that this is definitely something that is concerning. You can see that they're followed by phishing and improperly secured or unsecured mobile devices, accidental employee leaks, supply chain attacks, and intentional employee leaks. All of them are also related to zero trust networking. Basically, in other words, those companies are concerned with the fact that most of their users have more access rights than they should. Because if a user is able to gain information or able to pose a risk on the organization, this means that basically there is a good chance that they have too many privileged access to different resources they shouldn't. Another interesting thing that we see are the trends of what's going to happen and what are the things that those professionals are going to focus on in 2022, right? What are the main key things they want to focus on when thinking about what are the key factors they want to make sure that are basically addressed in 2022. So we see that IT and security professionals identify their top cybersecurity challenges for 2022 as cloud security, because they're moving to the cloud, data privacy, and data protection. You can see that cloud security is way, way up. We're talking about 32% of the people that have answered the survey talking about the fact that they need to secure their cloud resources. The reason for that, again, if you think about the first slide, that most of the security until recent events were actually focused on the on-premise environment. A lot of people were working from the office. You had to secure your office. Most of the resources were in the office, but everything is now moving to the cloud, and the access is always from outside of the organization into different resources, either cloud or on-premise. And this brings us to the Forrester New Wave report for Zero Trust Network access. This is an interesting report that was recently released. We'll be able to share it with you. I'm sure Michael will be able to provide you with information about this at the end of the webinar. There was a report issued about the state of affairs and where the ZTNA or the Zero Trust Network access is going to. This report actually outlines the industry leaders as well as the trends that this network and domain is going to go to. We were very lucky to be nominated and also recognized as domain leaders, both in the ease of use of our product, the supportability of our product, and the ease of scale over time. But the report also outlines quite a lot of the different trends that are happening within this domain and how a good ZTNA solution is, what's a good plan for a ZTNA solution for an organization. So this is definitely something we would love to share with you in order for you to get a better understanding of this domain and how other companies are actually addressing some of the challenges that we've mentioned. A little bit of the impact of moving to Zero Trust networking access. And this is interesting because we're working with a lot of companies that are actually doing this transition of sort of on-premise to a hybrid solution where there are some resources in different domains. And basically, facing those challenges and that we've mentioned before, where alongside the migration, they still need to work with legacy tools such as VPNs, such as on-premise servers that are managing security, a lot of different solutions that need to integrate into each other in order to provide the Zero Trust networking access experience, as well as a secure access to the different resources. One of those customers is actually Customer, a CRM solution software based in New York. And one of the interesting insights that they've shared with us was that since they have a small IT team, Perimeter 81 is really the most valuable solution for the entire company. Knowing that every employee is securely accessing their system and resources while using Perimeter 81 makes their job a whole lot easier. In other words, having a scalable solution that is actually managed removes quite a lot of the overhead that a lot of teams need to do while they do the migration and basically onboard sort of a hybrid solution where they need to provide access for employees that are working remotely and provide access into cloud computing and new cloud resources in a timely manner and quickly without actually investing a lot of resources and a lot of planning and a lot of time of the teams in the organization. Michael, back to you.
Thank you for that, Daniel. That was very interesting. And I'm sure as everyone can see, the future of digital security and digital identity is an exciting and very rapidly evolving world. To everybody watching, Ryan and Daniel both mentioned reports and case studies today, and you are all welcome to check them out in our Bright Talk attachment section. After the webinar, they will all be available for free, and you can feel free to download them or view them online at your leisure. And as you can see, we've now reached the Q&A session of our webinar. So let's see what questions we have today. So actually, we have one for you, Ryan. What role does machine identities play in software supply chain security?
Yeah, so the main way they play is really two areas. One is code signing certificates. So basically creating a digital signature on the code that you have to verify that that's your code, and also make sure that that code's locked and it can't be accessed by nefarious people coming after you. So code signing is a big thing that developers will kind of use, especially like if you're in remote work, if you're, obviously everyone's remote now, right? And so how do you know that a developer signed a certain piece of code and so on, right? It allows, having code signing solutions out there allows you to sign a code where you're at, know that it's from your code, and have it in a secure signing platform for you to be there, right? So that's a big one that it's used for that. The other way, and by the way, code signing is used for things like securing unprotected workstations or virtual machines or build servers, things like that. Just be a little bit more granular. That's usually what it's used, right? The other thing is using certificates in a high-speed environment in your software supply chain. And so I talked about earlier, a lot of companies and developers, they use they know how to like put a cert on a device or on a container or whatever it is. Like usually developers, they go off and they do it really quick. Like, okay, I got a cert on there, but they don't know how to manage it, and they don't know how to keep track of it. They don't know if it's in banned for security. They don't have any of that kind of in place. They just know, well, I need to put a cert on this thing. Let me do it really quickly so I can continue moving on and keep going, right? Well, those machine identities that you're throwing certs on, and those have those identities. The way that machine identity management comes into place is that you got to make sure that it's automated and orchestrated in a way that it's not going to either disrupt the DevOps process, or it's not being used in a way to keep the pipeline secure. So there's a lot of recent stories that have come out lately that talk about a attack on software supply chains. I won't name those companies' names. You can probably Google them and find out who they are. There's some big ones out there, but a lot of those, you can see ways that machine identities play in that space. If you don't have the security around it and you're only worried about going fast and not going fast and also staying secure.
Great. And actually, see, we have a few last minute questions. Daniel, so why don't I throw one your way? Is ZTNA just another buzzword? What role will zero trust play in the future of cybersecurity?
So there's a lot of buzzwords in the cybersecurity world, but to be honest, I don't think ZTNA is one of them. I think it's an approach, and I think this is why some think it's a buzzword. But the idea behind ZTNA is the ability to actually easily limit access and only provide the privileges and access for the users so that they'll be able to do their work, right? So if we're talking about the supply chain attacks that from the previous question, I mean, while they're related to code and machines, if you're able to block the traffic that is going outside of those different machines to be only going to the right resources, your different servers using the ZTNA solutions, because you're connecting everything through one unified network that you can monitor and control, this is definitely something that can also help you, right? Alongside with the ability to actually make sure that only the right people are accessing the different parts of your code and the different machines and the different infrastructure, so that nobody can actually jeopardize or expose some of your internal resources so that it can be attacked. So it's a very long, I guess, answer to a very short question, but in general, no, I don't think this is a trend just because the domain is changing. We're talking about a domain that haven't changed for quite a lot of time. I'm talking about the VPN and remote access, right? And the world, the way we access, the way we consume resources, the way we access resources, our needs as employees in companies, and our basically need as a company to be able to outsource some of the work so that we can actually hire additional candidates and find the right candidates in today's world. It basically poses a lot of challenges that cannot be addressed by the old technology. So ZTNA seems to be, and in my opinion, is the next step in security in order to be able to accommodate those different challenges.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. I'm going to send the next question over to Ryan. Ryan, how are companies deploying PKI today? How would someone go about evaluating PKI deployment options?
Yeah, so usually there's kind of and PKI stands for public key infrastructure, just so everyone's aware, right? That's the backbone of what's creating all these digital certificates. I sound very nerdy right now, but it's all done by asymmetric cryptography, which is basically you have the public key and the private key, right? So those pairs make something de-encrypt, and only one person has the other, right? So PKI has been around for a really long time. It's been around for 20 plus years now or so. And one of the things that most of the time when you're doing PKI, you're either evaluating it from, hey, I have an on-prem Microsoft, CA that's tied into Active Directory that is issuing these certificates that are out there, right? And I want to, I basically, people have left the company. I don't know how to do PKI anymore. I need to figure out ways to do it. You're either looking for a way to enhance that on-prem, and that you would basically take a certificate management solution like Keyfactor or somebody else is out there and attach that to the on-prem CA to orchestrate the certificates and make those certificates come under visibility, one single pane of glass, and so on, right? So you don't have these cert outages. The other way is to fully offload that to a managed PKI service that's in the cloud, like a private cloud PKI. And that's what Keyfactor does as well. But then there's a bunch of other options that are out there too that we also play into. So AWS Certificate Manager and Google CA Service are two cloud certificate issuers of certificates in the cloud. Prime Key EJBCA is another one. So if you're looking to totally offload and go to the cloud and kind of just all do everything through the cloud, you can tie in with certificate automation to all those areas as well. So really there's a hybrid approach, right? There's multiple ways to do it. And we're seeing more and more companies go this hybrid approach versus a pure multi-cloud, single cloud approach. We're seeing more and more companies that kind of demand for this in different use cases. So having something that connects into different CAs, different certificate authorities out there is very important to use and manage.
So this actually may be a perfect segue for you, Ryan. Someone also asked, what tools are available for machine identity management? Is there one tool for everything?
No, there's not one tool for everything. I mean, you can have a tool that would integrate to a lot of other machine identity management tools. So if you had a certificate management solution that can connect into tools like HashiCorp Vault for secrets management or CyberArk for PAM, they could issue search at the same time. So it depends on the different cryptographic assets that you have, but there isn't one vendor that does full issuance to automation of all the different machine identity management types. Like Keyfactor does that issuance to orchestration to revocation all the way through a certificate lifecycle that you would have for digital certificates. But if you have things like SSH keys or certificates or PAM or secrets, then you'd be talking about how to integrate that stuff so you can bring it all under one single pane of glass, but you're not going to be issuing all those same keys and cryptography from one single source platform.
Perfect. We actually have one more question, so I'll aim that towards Daniel. Daniel, what should businesses look for when selecting a ZTNA solution? Excuse me, and how difficult is it to integrate a zero trust solution in today's day and age?
So of course, Pyramid 81. No, I'm kidding. I think the idea is to find a solution that is basically ticking all of the boxes, right? And I think the Forrester report, can actually show which trends are now in the domain. But I think one of the main and important things that are related when you choose a vendor is to make sure that it's easy to use. It's easy to scale and doesn't require any rip and replace solutions, right? Because you already have a very expensive environment that you probably invested quite a lot of resources in. So the idea is basically to be able to implement something that is easy, quick, and doesn't require any hardware change within your environment. Another thing is definitely to make sure that you tick all of the boxes, right? There's a lot of solutions that are zero trust, but they're only providing you with remote access. There are solutions that are only providing you with sort of a firewall solution. There's a lot of resources that are providing you with isolated non-agent access. I think the idea is to find a solution that can tick all of the boxes, provide you with the freedom and the need and basically the ability to be agile and provide and accommodate all of your different use cases in one single solution. And also, of course, the most important part, a solution that can scale, right? I think one of the main things we can see both in the report, but also with COVID, is the fact that you don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow. So if you commit to something that is very robust and very limiting, it might pose a risk if something happens, right? You need to be able to grow. You need to be able to agile. To be agile, you need to be able to, I don't know, move your 100 employees that are working in the office today to be remote in a matter of minutes, should you need this, right? So I think those are the main key, decision points when you select a vendor.
Absolutely, Daniel. Thank you for your answer. So coming to a close, everybody, some really great questions here today. But if you didn't have a question that you had a chance to ask, or you have a question that you'd like to ask later, you are more than welcome to send us an email at sales@perimeter81.com, or learn more and visit Keyfactor at www.keyfactor.com as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also view the Perimeter 81 and Keyfactor complimentary reports after this webinar in the attachment section. We also invite you all to follow Perimeter 81 and Keyfactor on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and of course, Bright Talk, to keep up to date with all the different webinars we're hosting every month, and keep up to date with all the different trends that we know are rapidly changing. And last and not least, I want to definitely thank Daniel and Ryan for joining us today, and thank all of you in the audience, and hope all of you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure. Bye, everybody. Take care.